Modern whaling factories afloat. She is 616 feet long, 77 feet wide, and her deadweight is 24,000 tons. The operators of the Thorshøvdi are the firm of Dahl of Sandefjord, Norway, which is one of the oldest whaling firms in the world, having started their activities in 1887. This firm now operates 3 whaling expeditions, each expedition consisting of a factory ship, such as the Thorshøvdi, and 10 to 15 swift, powerful, and easily maneuverable steel-hulled catcher boats, having a length of up to 200 feet. Sandefjord, located in the southern part of Norway in the district of Vestfold, has often, and justly so, been called the whaling capital of the world. It is here that several of the Norwegian whaling companies have their home, and it is here that the offices of the World Controlling Agency is located. A very large percentage of the men who man these whaling expeditions come from Sandefjord and the neighboring towns of Tønsberg and Larvik. It is from Sandefjord that close to 100 ships sail each fall for the distant Antarctic. The history of the district in which Sandefjord is situated goes back to the heroic era of the Vikings, and the town itself was settled in medieval times. To begin with, Sandefjord was only a shipping port for timber, but already in the 1700s the city was the home of a growing fleet of merchant ships. In the closing years of the 19th century, men of vision with the courage and strength to carry out great plans laid the foundation of what has become the modern pelagic whaling industry of today, to the enduring benefit of Sandefjord, the district of Vestfold, and the economy of Norway as a whole. Sandefjord became to modern whaling what Dundee and New Bedford were to the English and American whaling trade of the era of sail. The departure of the huge ship is almost an anticlimax compared with the hustle and bustle of the preceding weeks and months, when the whole fleet and machinery had to be overhauled, and the equipment and stores brought on board for about 500 men for a 6 months' journey to the end of the world and back. Everybody is on board and the gangway is hauled in and the adventure has begun. At the mouth of the fjord, the pilot leaves the ship, and thus the last physical tie with home is cut. From now on, the Thorshøvdi is on her own, and thoughts turn toward the long voyage to the South Polar region, and to the sweat and toil that lies ahead. Voyaging ever southward, the sunlit days before reaching the whaling grounds are used by the crew to prepare the ship and the gear for the hunt. In order to protect the ship's permanent deck, a timber platform or plan is laid on top of it, on which the whales will be dragged up and carved throughout the season. Our first stop is Aruba, a small Dutch island in the West Indies, conveniently situated close to the oil fields of Venezuela. Here the Thorshøvdi will take on board the many thousand tons of fuel oil needed for her own propulsion and for the operation of the factory and for the propulsion of the expedition's catcher boats. A spectacular fire in a tank installation ashore enlivens our short stay in this port. Leaving her last civilized port of call behind, the ship heads again southward, and preparation on board proceeds. A few days later, we pass the equator, and Neptune's traditional visit is a welcome diversion to everyone aboard. Those who cross the line for the first time must undergo the ritual prescribed for this occasion. Good humor and good spirits mark this event, and it is a time of relaxation for the whole crew. Various contests and games complete the festivities and contribute to make the event a memorable one. It is only during the last few whaling seasons that helicopters have made their appearance in the Antarctic as the roving eye of the whaling expeditions. Painted a bright yellow, the helicopter can more easily be spotted, should it, in an emergency, have to go down in the sea or on the ice. The vast areas of the Antarctic Ocean can more easily be searched for whales from the air, thereby saving much valuable time for the catcher boats. While testing the helicopter, let us take a glance at the factory ship below. Her superstructure is divided in two vast areas of deck space, each capable of accommodating 2 or more 90-foot whale carcasses. In the stern, a gaping hole, the slipway through which the dead whales are hauled on board. Some 20 days after leaving Aruba, the jagged white peaks of South Georgia rise out of the mist ahead. This island, which is the only permanent inhabited place within the South Polar winter pack ice belt, was annexed to Great Britain by Captain James Cook in his circumnavigation of the Antarctic continent in 1772-1775. Great Viken, with its whaling station, is the main settlement on this outpost of the civilized world. More than 100 years ago, British and American vessels carried on fur seal and sea elephant fisheries in this area. This species of seal was unfortunately practically exterminated, and thereafter the mighty calm of the Antarctic Ocean was left undisturbed until 1892, when Norwegians inaugurated whaling in those regions. Having taken aboard its requirement of fresh water, Great Viken is soon left behind. The activity on board is reaching its peak, for the whale hunt is to start in a few days. Working on deck, the men take advantage of the last warm weather they will know for many months, for soon huge icebergs will tower in the distance, tower on the horizon, and the weather will start to become rough. The actual whale hunting is done by the factory's 10 or 12 catcher boats, such as the one we see here. These are extremely maneuverable and very powerful vessels, many of them capable of speeds up to 17 knots or more, which matches the speed of their prime quarry, the giant blue whale. The speedy catcher boats are awaiting their turn to be supplied with fuel oil, food, harpoons, and other catching equipment, and made ready for the hunt of the largest mammal the world has ever known. The hunt has begun. The tension aboard the catcher is slowly mounting. As likely areas are neared, the lookout goes aloft. The gunner scans the horizon for the telltale signs indicating the presence of whales. There she blows. To the experienced whaler, the shape and direction of the jets tells him that this is a fin whale and not a blue whale. Murderous enough in itself, the harpoon is made more lethal by a grenade, which at the same time constitutes its point and is fused to explode 3 seconds after the harpoon has been shot out of the gun. The gunner, by arm and hand signals, by shouted commands, and with the duplicate engine telegraph on the gun platform, maneuvers his ship into shooting range of the now thoroughly aroused and speeding whale. Fast fisk, as the Norwegians say, meaning we've got one. But the whale is not always killed outright, and the gunner is ready to give the coup de grace, his gun loaded with a killer harpoon. All whalemen believe that a dead whale, left adrift with the tail fluke still in position, will propel itself for miles through the effect of the waves on the flukes, and therefore these flukes are always cut off. Marked with a flag identifying the catcher boat that has killed it, the dead whale is cast adrift to be picked up later, whilst the hunt continues. The battle between whale and catcher can be understood properly only by one who has played a fighting fish on rod and line. The fish in this case is no salmon measured in pounds, however, but has the size and the weight of a large Coast Guard cutter. The hook has the weight of a ploughshare and is twice its size. The cast is not a thin strand of gut, but 20 fathoms of 3-inch nylon rope that will take a strain of 1,000 tons, and the line is even stouter hempen rope. The rod is the mast of the catcher, up which the line runs on snubbing springs which act as shock absorbers, and the reel at the butt of the rod, taking in line, letting it run, reeling in gently, is a powerful winch. The International Whaling Agreement has stipulated minimum length for each species of whale, below which they are not allowed to be taken. During the brief seconds that the gunner glimpses part of the whale's back whilst it surfaces for air, the gunner must make up his mind whether the whale is below or above the legal limit of length. Any mistakes made are at the gunner and his ship's expense, and the amazing truth is that gunners very rarely misjudge. Only about 2% of all the whales killed each year turn out to be below the allowed measurements. As we have seen, each catcher sets adrift the whales it kills. By international regulations, whales must be processed on board the factory within 33 hours of their having been killed. It therefore devolves upon buoy boats to round up these flagged whales and tow them to the factory ship. On each whaling factory there are employed 2 government-appointed whaling inspectors, whose duty it is to see that all international regulations as to measurements, utilization of raw material, etc., are observed. Inspectors have 100 or more regulations and restrictions to enforce. For instance, they measure and record the length of each whale brought aboard. They ensure that the expeditions on which they serve do not trespass the area set aside as sanctuaries. They say to it that the dates set by international agreement for opening and the close of the season are observed, and that all whales caught are processed within the 33-hour limit. Birds by the million come to do their own inspection of the feast, and not least amongst them are the solemn and uniform penguins, sad at the vastness of a meal they cannot possibly digest, or perhaps they are discussing the results of the day's catch. The whales are hauled on board through the stern slipway, with an ingeniously designed special grab weighing several tons. This fits over and clasps the stump of the whale's tail. The first operation is the removal of all blubber, which is done on the rear half of the ship's huge fencing deck. All engaged in this operation have their specific jobs. The fencers with their curved knives on 4-foot shafts do not hack and slice away at random, but rather each cut is deliberate and is the same cut that the same man is making during all his career as a fencer. First, the long blanket strips are cut and peeled from the whale, and then these in turn are cut into smaller pieces and are fed through openings in the deck directly down into the oil rendering equipment on the factory deck below. The blubber having been stripped from one side, the 100-ton carcass has to be turned over to allow the fencers to attack the other side. The job of fencer takes years of training, and there is not much room for mistakes. One false cut, one loose shackle, and there would be blood other than whale blood coloring the deck. A fencer who does not fully understand his job could not live long in the maelstrom of straining cables, razor-sharp knives, and hunks of slippery blubber. When all the blubber has been removed, the pink and white mountain of flesh is hauled forward to the lemming deck, where the lemmers, the expert anatomists of the ship, await it. Here on the lemming deck, the final process of disarticulation of the whole whale carcass and the sorting out of the cuts into the various categories is carried out in the final stage. Once or twice, while the whaling season progresses, the factory ship is serviced by a tanker, which brings new supplies of fuel oil and takes delivery of the whale oil already produced. Notice the whales between the tanker and the factory ship. No fender yet devised by man is big or strong enough to keep a tanker from smashing in the side of a factory ship, when it is tied up to it and a high Antarctic sea is running. So even in death, the whale is required to do a whale of a job as a fender. The Antarctic seas are seldom calm enough for a gangplank to be laid between two ships, and so personnel have to be transferred in this difficult and tedious manner. Meanwhile, the work on the factory ship goes on. The day's catch has been satisfactory, and the whales are awaiting their turn to be hauled on deck and cut up. When describing a whale, particularly the largest of them all, the blue whale, one generally runs out of adjectives, so a few comparative figures should help. A blue whale can attain a length of up to 105 feet and weigh about 100 tons, equal in weight and bulk to 25 elephants or well over 100 oxen. The whale is, of course, a mammal, not a fish, and gives birth to live young ones. After birth, the baby whale increases in weight at 10 pounds per hour, or 220 pounds per day, until it is the size of the leviathan we see here, something to dream about for a nutrition expert. A whale consists of about 20% blubber, 50% meat, 20% bones, and 10% internal organs. Its tongue would overload a fair-sized truck. Its skull is the size and weight of a motor car, but the brain contained therein is not much bigger than a carburetor. On a factory ship like the Thorshøvdi, and working around the clock in two shifts, some 40 of these monsters can be completely cut up and processed in one 24-hour day. Now a word about the factory ship below the flensing and lemming deck. Briefly, the factory consists of two sections, one to process oil from the blubber and the other to process oil from the meat and the bones. This is mainly done by subjecting the dismembered whale to intense steam heating in rotary boilers. As has been seen, the lemmers use the same type of knives as the flensers to assist them in cutting the meat small enough to drop below deck directly into the rotary steam boilers below. The whale is now reduced mainly to its skeletal structure, and the jaws and whale bones are removed, whilst the ribs are finally dismembered. These vast hunks of meat and bone are the ribs. The first half of the great backbone is cut free of meat and goes to the power saws. Now the ribs are separated. Finally, the backbone, cleaned entirely of meat, is dragged along the deck to the great steam-powered saws. Here the bone is reduced to small enough pieces to be processed in the steam-heated boilers below. The residue after this oil rendering process is complete is called glue water. This glue water is subjected to a process designed to extract from it any vestige of oil as well as any solid material, which is then dried and bagged. This meal is rich in protein and is used for animal feed. It can truly be said that every ounce of the monsters hauled up through the slipway has been used and transformed into useful and necessary products. Whale oil is, of course, an essential ingredient for the European margarine industry, and the byproducts essential cattle feed for raising prime herds throughout the world. After about 70 days in the Antarctic, almost on the edge of the southern ice shelf, the huge hunt is over, and the long trek homeward begins. Months of sweat and toil are over. Slowly the ship resumes an almost forgotten appearance, that of a ship instead of a butcher shop. Every vestige of the whale and everything that might remind whalemen of the enemy they had fought during the Antarctic summer is removed. Whaling is for Norway an ancient heritage, and much of the spiritual capital that it represents is an asset of the Norwegian race. The climate and scenery of Norway have so influenced national character that Norwegians are and have been preeminently fitted for carrying on the whaling industry. Moreover, they are seafaring people, accustomed to voyage on more inclement seas than the majority of seafaring folk. Though progress has provided more and more efficient tools to hunt and kill the whale, what remains unchanged are the majestic whales themselves and the extraordinary men who pursue them.